Hello my friends, this is Christian. In this lecture I will show you a really strong opening against the Sicilian Alapin. And the Sicilian Alapin arises after the moves pawn to e4, c5 and c3. And this position is called Sicilian Alapin. And I think the strongest recommending against this is the pawn to d5, immediately attacking the center. I think this is the best option for black. And that's the reason why I make this video for you. And before we go into the main lines after e captures d5, I will show you a tricky line after the move pawn to e5. After this move, you should continue with the move knight to c6. And after d4, c takes d4, c takes d4, I will prefer the tricky move queen to b6. Because the queen has many threats here. It is attacking the b2 pawn and attacks the d4 pawn with the knight. And now white has to protect his weakness on d4. And for example, he looks for a natural move like knight to f3. This is a huge blunder because after the move bishop to g4, it is not clear after bishop takes knight on f3 how the pawn on d4 can be defended. So this is not good to play knight f3 for white. That is the first trap here, little trap. Another defending move is bishop to e3. Cannot play it because queen takes on b2. So why the hell should white defend this pawn? And the only way your opponent will find here is to play the move knight to e2. It's blocking the bishop, but the pawn stays in the game here. And you should continue with the move bishop to f5 to use this weakness on c2. And if he plays another move like pawn to a3, for example knight to c3, you have this huge trap with knight to b4. And he cannot do anything against this attack. For example, he plays a move like f3 to try to make some escape for the king. You can play this winning sequence and the killer move here, bishop to c2, and this queen has only one square, queen to d2, and after knight to d3 it will be checkmate here. So the queen forcefully has to capture the knight, and after bishop captures the queen, he can only resign now. This is a really funny trap here, and you will be not think, oh, this is easy. No, this game is a game between two grandmasters, and that's why I like the trick. Everybody can fall into that. Now let's have a look at the main line in those positions. The main line arises after e4, c5, c3, and the main move from us, pawn to d5. Main line is e takes d5, queen takes d5, and d4. And now I prefer to play the Baumer defense because it is very solid in this position. And in the Baumer defense, you have to remember at first develop both of your knights. Which knight you develop first is not very important. For example, knight to f6, then knight to f3, and knight to c6. And this is the main position which we are looking for. And now I will show you a few moves from white and how you can manage this very good. The first question that comes to mind is there a big trap for black after d captures on c5? And the answer is definitely no, it isn't. But you can go for really strong positional game with black here. And that's the way I will show you. The first continuation is queen captures on d1, king captures on d1, and now I look for a long analysis by myself with some computers, and I decided to play definitely bishop to g4. because your opponent forcefully has to play bishop to e2 instead bishop to b5, which will be more dangerous for black here. And after bishop to e2, I think you can play not castle on the queen side with check. I would prefer to play rook to d8. And now it is a critical position. White can go wrong by 2 moves. And the first one is bishop d2. The second one is knight to d2. And both of them after, for example, here after the move knight to e4, he is losing pawn immediately. And that will be not really good. And for example, white does go away with the king, which is the correct move here. You can just keep pressure on the center with the move pawn to e5. And after pawn to e5, this c5 pawn is under attack, so it has to be protected by the move pawn to b4. And then we just develop our pieces with bishop to e7, and he plays, for example, bishop to e3. And then we're attacking the bishop. Bishop has to go out of the way because he gets another double pawn here. So bishop to d2, for example. So, okay, computer is hanging. Then we'll just castle on the king's side, and then knight to a3. This is a natural developing move. And now it is time for the big positional crushing move. And this is really important that you keep this in mind. And the crushing move here is pawn to a5. And this is also winning the c5 pawn. And then it is really hard to hold this position with white. Okay, the thing is, this is 3 times attacked, this pawn, and only 2 times defended. So white has to go for another defender, and this could be, for example, rook to b1. But after rook to b1, we have a following sequence which is really, really strong for black. And we're playing a captures on b4, c captures on b4, and now a tricky move bishop to f5, attacking rook. Rook has to go out of the way. But then we can play another tricky move, and this is to play e4 immediately. And the knight has only 1 square which is possible to play, to retreat, and this is the starting square. Knight goes back to g1. And then we can play another very fast move and gaining some tempo, and this is bishop to f6, attacking the rook again. Rook goes, for example, to c3. And after rook to c3, you can capture this pawn here on b4. Because at first sight, it looks a little bit strange, because it is 2 times attacked, this pawn, by these 2 knights, and is 2 times defended. But you will see what will happen. Here is a tactical threat. After knight takes, bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes, here comes the winning move. I think it is easy to see. Yes, bishop on c3 check, and white can only resign in this hopeless position. So that is the reason why before rook to b1 is not possible. After a5, rook to b1 is horrible for white. So another example I will show you is if white gives up this pawn and tries to go for a normal game. I just play a few moves, for example, pawn to b4, knight to a7, for example. The pawn is attacking the knight goes back. Yes, this pawn is not possible to defend now. Because, for example, he tries a move like bishop to e3, you just take it with the knight and then grab the pawn on c5. So this cannot be protected, this pawn anyways. And if when you capture this pawn, I think black's position is much better. We just look at that. For example, he plays a good move here, And this is, for example, knight to c4, and then we just capture the pawn. And if you look at this position, you're attacking twice this pawn, you're controlling the center here, your opponent cannot castle anyways, and this is much better for black. Now we have reached the main position which we were looking for. And white has a few choices now. For example, bishop to e2, bishop e3, which is the main move, and a sideline which goes with knight to a3. At first we have a look at the move knight to a3. White wants to go for some tempo with the move c4 attacking the queen, or perhaps bishop to c4. But both of them doesn't work in this system. And now I will show you why. After this knight to a3, we have the tricky bishop to g4 and pinning the knight. And for example, bishop to c4 attacking queen, but this is a blunder. After queen to e4 check, and bishop to e3 only a reaction, then c takes d4, c takes d4, we play e6, and perhaps your opponent tries to go for this weakness on c7. We can simply give another check and the king is losing the castle right. And after castling on the king's side, black is doing much better. So I think bishop to c4, in this position, bishop to c4 is a big blunder. For example, he tries another move, c4, but it is exactly the same story. We can play immediately queen to e4, and the best move for white to react here is to play queen to e2. But after queen to e2, we simply capture the knight, and g captures f3, and then we simply take the queen, bishop takes, and we win the pawn. And black does very much better than white in this position. Now we have a look at the bishop to e2 line. This is a little bit more passive and not really exciting, but I will show you just a few very comfortable moves how you can handle this line after bishop to e2. And the plan for you is bringing out the white square bishop. You can also play b6 and place the bishop here, but I think more solid is to play bishop to f5 here, but both of them is possible. So bishop f5, then a6, then the bishop later on has to go to this square, queen later on wants to the c7 square, and you should castle on the king's side. That are the plans of this solid structure. And for example, I will show you a few moves very quickly. So after bishop to f5, castling, e6, bishop f4, bishop, for example, now on e7, pawn takes, bishop takes, knight is developing, castle on the king's side, bishop c4 taking queen, queen c8, and queen e2. Try to trade the bishops here. I think that will be important in this line. But after the trade of the bishops, for example, rook goes to d1, and then queen c7. And all is fine, and this is about equal. You will have a really calm game here. Now we come to the last move, the last most played option from white, and this is bishop to e3. This is the main move, and we start our tricky line with the move pawn to e5. And the funny thing in this opening is white now is forced to capture the e5 pawn, but I think the most of your opponent will not see this because we have 4 attackers on this pawn. 1, 2, 3, and the knight 4, and 3 and also 4 defenders: the knight, the bishop, pawn, and queen. But I think the most of your opponents will overlook that this knight is pinned, because if he moves now the bishop, this g2 pawn is later on attacked by the queen. and this is really dangerous to overlook this. And I think the most played move here will be bishop to e2, and it will be a big blunder. I will show you the following continuation, and that will be c takes d, c takes d, e takes d4, and after bishop takes, knight takes, the knight cannot take because queen takes g2. That is not possible. And for example, if queen takes, then you can play bishop on c5, and you will have a huge advantage with the black pieces. In both cases, black is doing better here. Perhaps your opponent knows these tricks and plays the correctly move in this position, which is d takes e5. I will show you how you can have a really comfortable game. And here you should capture the queen, and after king captures, you can play knight to g4. Your opponent has to be careful that the bishop stays here, because you can immediately set this trap. So for example, the best move in this position is knight to d2, and then we simply recapture the pawn and play a few moves and show you how you can play comfortable. After bishop here, you simply capture the knight. After knight captures, you play bishop to d7, and for example king to e2, castle on the queen side, and then he can play the rook here, you play bishop on e7, and that is about equal, and I like this position very much to play. And okay, that was all. I hope you liked this video, get some new inspiration, and perhaps you can give me a like. Thank you, bye bye.